My fellow Solutions, good night. Tonight is the third time that I'm addressing you in less than 2 weeks. This is extraordinary, but we are living in extraordinary times that have been generated by an extraordinary pandemic, the coronavirus called COVID-19, which has been the subject of my 2 previous addresses and in which I return tonight. As we have been witnessing, this pandemic is ravaging the globe, developed and undeveloped countries, first world and third world states, continental military powers, and no power island states, all like stricken in the path, and all over the world, governments and legislators are taking extraordinary actions to combat it. Our world is in crisis that at the very least can be likened to World War II or the financial crisis of 2008. Governments and international institutions in both cases were required to respond, albeit in different ways, to these crises, to return the world economy to normality. Immediately after World War II, governments responded by adopting heavy deficit spending to rebuild damaged infrastructure and getting people back to work. And in the case of the financial crisis, governments and central banks around the world were bailing out financial institutions and providing financial capital to shore up the banking system. In the case of COVID-19, government interventions are required again, but this time it is to ensure citizens are protected and able to sustain themselves while social distancing, good personal hygiene, and testing are all necessary to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Displaced workers who will be unable to work for a while need money in their pockets to feed their families. We must do all we can to avoid panic and social disorder. And of course, our health facilities need to be dramatically improved to look after those infected and requiring health care. Let me thank our health and medical professionals who have been given so much of themselves for us already on the front line in fighting this disease. We are heartened that the government has at least been made to remove you and the patients of Victoria Hospital to the new OKEU Hospital, which the St. Lucia Labour Party completed almost 5 years ago. You and the citizens of this country deserved no less. My appreciation and gratitude also goes out to the personnel of the St. Lucia Fire Service and the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, who are also on the front line in the theater of the world war against COVID-19. I want to thank the government and people of Cuba for once more coming to our assistance in our time of need, with the dispatch of 128 medical professionals to assist us at this critical time. Our relations with Cuba have been long-standing and deep, and Cuba has never failed to answer our calls. We speak of extraordinary times, but Cuba is an extraordinary country. The SLP pledges its unwavering support to the government and people of Cuba in their struggle against the unjust economic sanctions to which they have been subjected. I take this opportunity also to thank the government and people of the Republic of Taiwan for their contributions to our battle against this disease. Taiwan has always been a steadfast friend to St. Lucia and also deserves our gratitude. We are also concerned that the government appears to be ignoring some of the very guidelines that it has called upon the public to observe in relation to COVID-19. The government has asked our people to observe social distancing in line with the advice of the health authorities, and so it has closed down all non-essential services in the country. So why is the government undertaking new projects in some communities, like the construction of new roads and buildings and work on some playing fields? Are these activities absolutely essential at this time? On Wednesday, 25th March, the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, in an address to member states on the policies they should be taken to combat COVID-19, recommended 6 actions, the 6th of which was refocus the whole of government on suppressing and controlling COVID-19. The Prime Minister has told us before that on COVID-19, he is following the advice of the WHO, PAHO, and other regional organizations. I therefore commend this recommendation to his government. We are cooperating in trying to stem the onslaught of COVID-19 on the health of our people, but it has already devastated our economy. Our tourism industry, the economic backbone, has been shut down. Thousands of our citizens have lost their jobs, and small businesses and the self-employed are adrift. We as a country must therefore deal with the implications of this economic shock while simultaneously counterattacking the virus on the health front. In my previous addresses, I called upon the government to introduce measures to overcome the economic fallout of COVID-19, particularly in relation to workers who are now unemployed. In the spirit of continued cooperation and national unity against COVID-19, the St. Lucia Labour Party is proposing the following initiatives to assist in cushioning the devastating economic impact of the virus. I have sent the proposals to the Prime Minister for the consideration of his government, and I now wish to share them with you. Health services. We estimate that for the next 3 months, resources will be required to handle the actions required to fight COVID-19. These include steps to expand and increase testing, community tracing, quarantine and isolation when deemed necessary, education and information dissemination, hygiene and sanitation, and the cost of additional staffing, as well as costs related to commissioning the OKU hospital. We estimate that $45 million will be required for this purpose. We also propose the following measures that will form the basis of an economic stimulus aimed at providing relief to the thousands of anxious St. Lucians. The package is designed for an initial 3-month period, but the situation is dynamic and will require monthly monitoring and/or adjustments. The economic survival and support programs that we propose for implementation for the next 3 months are: 1. Direct income support. 2. Fuel support. 3. Agriculture and food support. 4. Domestic utilities and rent support. 5. Short-term employment. And 6. Small and medium enterprise support. 7. Travel and tourism support. These broad programs are further broken down into sub-programs to cover these critical areas, as I shall explain. Direct income support. This program calls for government's intervention to provide direct income support to all sectors which have been impacted by layoffs and inactivity. We estimate 40,000 people can benefit from this proposal. A monthly stipend, maximum $1,000, should be paid to all qualified persons whose regular income have been cut off or substantially reduced. Payroll, formal hotel employees and restaurant employees, self-employed vendors, taxi drivers, tour guides, active NIC contributors, and others falling in that pool will qualify for assistance. Working for the NIC, employers, taxi and vendor associations, village councils, hotels, the eligible citizens can be identified for this assistance, which will cost $129 million for the 3 months. There should be an increase in public and social assistance. Additional assistance should be provided to needy persons and those who are presently on government assistance and persons with disabilities because of the extra difficult circumstances that they will face during this period. Any other assistance that they might have been receiving from family members will be scarce during this period. We estimate that intervention to cost $2.6 million. Of course, the Home for the Disabled must not be forgotten. Food vouchers for the SSDF should be distributed to deserving families based on the population of the 17th constituency. This intervention should cost $5 million. Starting from April, a monthly bonus should be paid to the frontline health workers, including nurses, doctors, and first responders, for the extraordinary efforts in the light to contain this coronavirus and protect the population. This intervention could cost $1.2 million. Fuel supports. This support will provide direct subsidy on fuel purchased for high consumers of fuel, namely fisherfolk and public transport operators. Fishing boat operators, especially registered fisherfolk, would need fuel subsidy in order to remain in business, to supply much needed protein to our people without the need to increase fish prices. A fuel voucher should be introduced as a direct subsidy to that industry. The voucher can be the equivalent of the excise tax amount of $4 per gallon of gasoline. The value would be based on the monthly consumption rate of the fishers. This measure would be easily implemented through the various fisherfolk cooperatives island-wide and would greatly assist in our food security. This intervention would cost $2.2 million. Minibus operators should be provided with direct fuel subsidy through a similar voucher system mechanism to enable that sector to remain viable, providing an essential service to the country under very difficult circumstances. The imposition of social distancing on public transport has affected these operators financially, and every effort must be made by government to support this sector. This intervention we estimate to cost $3.6 million. Agricultural and food supports. We propose income support for the farmers who have not been paid by the NFA for the produce sold to Winfresh, estimated at $2.5 million. Income support for the farmers who sell directly to the hotels and restaurants and who will no longer be receiving any income, at a cost of $3 million. To enhance our food security, we recommend that inputs of seeds, fertilizers, and the planting material, together with irrigation support, be provided to our farmers at a cost of $3.6 million. Domestic utilities and rental support. Lucilec should be asked to cover for the next 3 months the first 180 kilowatts for households which require relief. This would result in a savings of $135 on the electricity bill of approximately 30,000 households. There should be no disconnection during that period. This intervention should cost $12.1 million. WASCO should also be asked to cover the next 3 months the first 3,000 gallons of water consumed for households which require relief. This would result in a savings of $25 for approximately 30,000 households. There should be no disconnection during that period. That intervention should cost $2.2 million. Landlords must be encouraged not to evict tenants and consider reduced part or suspension of payments, taking into account that there may be a moratorium on mortgage payments. Short-term employment. We need some critical sectors of the society to provide necessary services while observing the necessary protocols of social distancing. A farmer fisheries labor support program can create jobs and assist in boosting our primary production, costing $1.5 million. An expansion of the home help program can assist over 300 seniors and persons with disabilities at a cost of $1 million. A national landscape and beautification program can enhance our roadways, parks, trails, historic sites, and attractions. In other words, a step costing $3 million. Small and micro enterprises support. Our small and micro enterprises are already suffering from loss of income. There are many small businesses, some of whom employ just 1 or 2 other persons, some many more. They will require assistance to survive in this period. We propose a small business grant facility to aid up to over 1,000 small and micro enterprises. A grant of $5,000 monthly is proposed, costing approximately $15 million. The arts, entertainment, and media sector, which we have often termed as a creative industry, requires special attention. Artists, performers, DJs, musicians, graphic designers, entertainers, media producers are most particularly affected. They can be persuaded to produce useful programs to raise the national spirit. This intervention will cost $3 million. Travel and tourism support. A short-term grant to small hotels and guest houses, E&B operators, and other operators who are not captured in the income support program at a cost of $15 million. The public services. Salaries for civil and public servants in the initial 3-month period should be financed by the issuance of new public debt or from existing surpluses. The international financial institutions will support this venture. Banks will also be expected to support this undertaking with rollovers and fully subscribing to the new issued debt. It must never be forgotten that we are living in extraordinary times and extraordinary measures are needed to protect the lives of our people, since there can be no economy without people. We propose that government should offer companies who retain and continue to compensate staff a tax credit of 150% of the total paid to the employees. A waiver of income tax installments due for the year 2020. Payment of tax refunds of less than $2,000 due to taxpayers. The moratorium of loans and mortgage payments by financial institutions should not attract increased interest rates or late payment fees. We have been visited by an invisible enemy that threatens our livelihood, and sadly, the lives of many are in jeopardy. Our priorities must therefore necessarily be revisited in response to the threat of COVID-19. We must act decisively and adopt policy measures that are efficient and effective. Many of our citizens have already lost their jobs, and more will be in the coming days and weeks, and the ability to look after themselves and their families. A caring government has a civic and moral authority to help these people now. It is not enough to only extend our concern. These displaced workers have human needs just like us, and so we must help them from whatever resources we may have as a country. The government's priorities pre-COVID-19 cannot be the same as post-COVID-19. My fellow St. Lucians, sisters and brothers, as I said at the commencement of my address, this is an extraordinary time, and it demands extraordinary action to save ourselves and our country. This is why we have presented these recommendations for an economic stimulus package. We must be extraordinarily disciplined in our response to this pandemic. It means strictly and rigidly following the instructions given to us by the health authorities and adhering to the regulations set by the government to combat the disease. Frequent hand washing, maintain social distancing, and stay at home. The next few weeks will be most challenging. We must be prepared for even more extraordinary action and discipline on our parts. If the virus becomes more severe, we must not panic. Panic will only worsen the situation. But if a resolute and united purpose and the grace of God, we can and we will overcome. I thank you.